The sun over Dry Creek burned like fire that day, melting the horizon into a haze of golden dust. The wind came hard off the mesa, carrying the bitter taste of iron and dry sage. Every breath felt like swallowing heat. Abel Harkin reined in his tired bay horse near the old supply station. His wagon creaked, loaded with sacks of feed and a half-empty barrel of water. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, but he didn't mind. Heat, dust, and silence had long been part of his life. Ever since the day the fever took his wife and left him with an empty ranch and too many acres of quiet. The place looked half dead, the way most things did out here. The wood of the porch was sun-bleached, the windows covered in a film of grit. But there, beneath the warped roof of the station, someone sat, a lone figure wrapped in a faded shawl, still as a rock. At first, Abel thought she might be asleep. Then she lifted her head and he saw her eyes. They were black as obsidian and just as cold. The woman's skin was brown and sunburnt, her face proud but tired, her hair tangled by the wind. Next to her feet sat a small canvas bag, her whole life tied up in one worn piece of cloth. The station master, an old man with tobacco stains on his beard, leaned toward Abel. "Found her sitting there when the wagon from Fort Stanton rolled through," he muttered. "The missionaries dumped her. Said she wasn't welcome no more." "Why?" Abel asked quietly. "Guess they finally remembered she's Apache," the man said, spitting into the dust. "Figured she don't belong with them." Abel turned back to her. The woman didn't move, didn't flinch under his gaze. She looked past him, past the road, toward the desert that shimmered like glass. He recognized that look, the hollow kind people wear when they've lost too much to fear anything else. He'd worn it himself once. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. A tumbleweed rolled between them, catching on her shawl before the wind dragged it away. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled behind the hills. Abel wiped the sweat from his brow. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. No answer. Her eyes shifted to him, sharp, uncertain, measuring. She was used to being hunted, not helped. He cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady. "I've got a roof," he said. "Some land. Water that still runs most days. If you need a place, you can come with me." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. The wind picked up again, lifting strands of her dark hair across her face. For a heartbeat, she looked almost like part of the desert itself. Strong, scarred, beautiful in a way that comes only from surviving. The station master snorted. "You sure you want to bring her back, Harkin? Folks'll talk." Abel didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on her. Finally, the woman nodded once. Small, cautious, but sure. A silent agreement between two people the world had already forgotten. Abel tipped his hat, motioning toward the wagon. "Then let's go," he said simply. As she rose, the sun caught the dust at her feet, swirling around them in a circle of red light. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Out there, in the middle of nowhere, under a sky big enough to swallow them both, a cowboy and an outcast woman took the first step towards something neither of them had expected, a second chance. The road back to Dry Creek Ranch was nothing but silence and wind. The wagon wheels moaned over the packed dirt, carving the same ruts Abel had followed for years. The sun had dipped low, staining the mesas in rust and shadow. Nita sat in the back, her hands folded over the small canvas bag she carried like armor. She didn't ask where they were going. Abel didn't ask where she'd been. The desert filled the space between them, the only voice either of them trusted. When the ranch finally came into view, it looked smaller than he remembered. Just a tired stretch of fence, a crooked barn, and a house that leaned into the wind like it had given up long ago. The place was quiet, too quiet. Even the crickets had stopped bothering with it. Abel pulled the reins and the wagon creaked to a halt. "Ain't much," he muttered, "but it's what's left." He climbed down, untied the horse, and pointed toward the well. "Water's good. Pull slow. The rope fray's easy. House leaks some on the north wall. Barn's half gone, but there's space inside if you need to lay down." Nita didn't answer. She moved like someone who had learned to keep her distance, each step careful, watching him from the corner of her eye. When she knelt to scoop water from the bucket, the last light caught her face, and for a moment Abel saw how young she really was, beneath the dust and the hard edges. He turned away, suddenly uncomfortable with the thought. That night she slept in the hayloft of the old barn. Abel brought her a thick wool blanket and left it by the door. "Gets cold after dark," he said. She nodded once, not meeting his eyes. Inside the house, he sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning. The flame flickered against the warped wood, throwing long, lonely shadows. His supper sat untouched. From outside came the sound of the wind pushing against the barn boards, whistling through the cracks like some restless ghost. He leaned back, rubbed his jaw, and let the question come. Had he brought trouble home? Or had he just done something right for the first time in years? He didn't know which scared him more. The wind howled again, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Abel took one last look toward the barn, then blew out the lamp. At dawn, the smell of smoke and coffee woke him. He stepped outside, boots crunching frost, and stopped short. Nita was crouched by the fire pit, feeding it with kindling. She had the kettle on, her shawl pulled tight, her hair catching the faint gold of morning light. She didn't look up when he came near, just poured a tin cup and set it beside him on a flat rock. Steam rose between them. Abel hesitated, then took it. "Thanks," he said quietly. Nita gave a small nod, eyes still on the fire. Neither of them smiled. Neither needed to. In that pale morning light, with nothing but wind and coffee between them, two strangers shared something neither had felt in a long, long time. Peace that didn't need words. Out here, that was how trust began. By the time word spread through Dry Creek, it was already too late to stop the talking. Every porch, every bar counter, every Sunday pew had the same whisper. That rancher, Abel Harkin, took in an Apache woman. And when the story grew legs, it ran even faster. "He's marrying her." Abel heard the gossip long before it reached his door. Folks didn't mean harm, but out here, difference had a way of making people uneasy. A man could mend a fence with his neighbor one day and still cross the street to avoid him the next if he broke from what was expected. But Abel had made up his mind. The marriage wasn't about love, not the kind the preacher spoke of. It was about two people standing at the edge of a hard world, trying to build something steady before the wind blew them away. He rode into town that evening, dust settling on his hat brim, and tied his horse outside the old chapel. The building leaned like it was tired of praying for people who never listened. Inside, the pews smelled of dry wood and candle smoke. Reverend Miles, a thin man with hands like twigs, looked up from a Bible missing half its pages. Abel didn't bother with small talk. "Reverend," he said, "I need you to marry us." The old man blinked. "You and the Apache woman?" "That's right," Miles sighed, glancing toward the window where the sunset burned red over the hills. "Folks won't take kindly to it." Abel met his gaze. "Folks don't feed me. They don't fix my fences either." There was no anger in his tone, just the flat certainty of a man too tired to ask for approval. After a long pause, the Reverend nodded. "Tomorrow evening, then. Bring her." When the time came, the sky was painted in fire, orange, gold, and violet streaks bleeding into the horizon. Nita wore a plain cotton dress someone from town had left on the porch weeks ago. Her hair was loose, her face calm but unreadable. Abel wore the same shirt he worked in, freshly washed and stiff with soap. No guests came. Only the Reverend and his wife stood as witnesses. The wind carried the smell of mesquite and the hum of distant crickets. As the Reverend read the vows, Abel's mind wandered, not to the words but to the stillness around them. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel empty. "Do you take this woman?" "I do," Abel said before the question even finished. The Reverend turned to Nita. "And do you take this man?" She didn't speak. Instead, she lifted her gaze to Abel's, steady, dark, unflinching. There was no fear there, no surrender, only something deeper, a quiet, cautious faith. She gave a single nod. The Reverend closed the book. "Then by God's will, it's done." The wind rose suddenly, sweeping across the dry churchyard, lifting dust into a halo around them. Nita's shawl fluttered like a bird trying to remember how to fly. Abel looked at her and saw not the strangeness others saw, but the calm of someone who had already walked through hell and come out still standing. He reached for her hand, rough, calloused, warm. "Guess we're family now," he said softly. She didn't answer, just met his eyes in silence. And in that moment, under the dying light of the desert sun, Abel saw something he hadn't seen since the day his wife was buried. A reason to believe again. The Harkin ranch sat quiet beneath the hard blue sky. Too quiet. Wind scraped over the land like sandpaper, dragging dust through the dead grass. The well had dropped to a thin trickle, the fences leaned, and the cattle, thin and hollow-flanked, moved slow, their ribs showing beneath sunburnt hides. It was the kind of silence that swallowed men whole if they stayed long enough. Abel had learned to live with it. He had talked to the wind more than he had to people these last few years. But now there was another sound, the soft shuffle of bare feet on dry earth, the scrape of a broom across the porch, the faint thud of wood against the wall. Nita. She worked without asking, without speaking. At sunrise, she was already outside, hauling water from the well, washing dust from the window panes, sweeping out the barn. Her small frame moved through the ruins of his ranch like someone trying to coax life out of something already given up for dead. Abel watched from the corral, one hand resting on the rail. He didn't understand it. Why she bothered. She didn't owe him anything. Yet there she was, mending what years of grief and wind had broken. Inside the cabin, the smell of smoke drifted through the doorway for the first time in months. Nita stood at the stove, stirring a pot hung over a low flame. The light from the fire caught in her hair, and the room, once gray and still, looked almost alive again. Abel came in quietly, removing his hat. He had almost forgotten what supper looked like. On the table sat beans, cornbread, and a small tin of coffee. Simple food, but warm, real. He sat down. Nita didn't join him. She moved to the corner, fixing a tear in one of his shirts. Abel took a bite, then another. The beans were smoky, rich with a taste that pulled something loose inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just filling his stomach. He was eating like a man who lived. He looked toward her. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. Nita's hands didn't stop sewing. "The house was sick," she said softly. "Now it breathes again." Her words caught him off guard. He wanted to answer, to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Gratitude felt foreign, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Outside, dusk crept in. Coyotes howled somewhere past the ridge. Abel stepped onto the porch, the smell of wood smoke clinging to his shirt. From the barn came a faint sound, soft, almost like wind at first, then clearly a voice. Nita was singing. The melody rose and fell in the Apache tongue, low and haunting. It carried across the yard, across the tired fences and the thirsty fields. Abel stood still, hand over his chest as if afraid to breathe. He didn't know the words, but he felt them. The song sounded like the earth remembering rain, or like a prayer whispered for the dead. For a moment he thought of Mary, his wife, her laughter, the smell of lilacs that used to hang by the window. He imagined her standing there in the doorway, smiling faintly, nodding toward Nita as if to say, "It's all right now." When the song ended, the silence returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was different, softer. Abel turned back toward the house, the lamplight glowing through the cracks in the shutters. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a ghost wandering his own land. He felt like a man standing in a home again. The days grew longer, and the wind over Dry Creek lost a bit of its bite. The fields were still cracked and dry, but there was movement now, laughter where there had only been silence. It started with one child. A boy of about 7 wandered up the road one morning, bare feet white with dust, clutching a broken slate board under his arm. His mother worked laundry in town. His father, a ranch hand, drank more than he earned. He'd heard the rumor. The Apache woman on Harkin's ranch was teaching children to read. At first, Abel thought it was nonsense. But one afternoon when he came back from the north pasture, he saw them, 6 of them, thin kids with sunburnt cheeks and patched clothes, sitting cross-legged in the shadow of the old storage shed. The door had been torn off years ago, and sunlight streamed through the cracks in the roof, painting stripes across the dirt floor. Nita stood at the front, chalking letters on a piece of board propped against a barrel. Her voice carried soft but clear, rising and falling with the rhythm of a lullaby. "B-I-L-L," she said, then pointed. "Say it with me." A chorus of tiny voices repeated after her, rough but eager. Ball! Abel leaned against the fence post and watched. The sight of it pulled at something deep in him. Later, when the lesson ended, one little girl stayed behind. She was pale-skinned but had her mother's dark eyes. She looked up at Nita and asked, Miss Nita, what does the word home mean? The question hung in the air, heavy as the heat. Nita smiled, tired but gentle. It means, she said slowly, the place where you stop running. The child tilted her head, thinking about it, then nodded. That night, Abel couldn't get the words out of his mind. The place where you stop running. Maybe that's what he'd been doing all this time. Running from ghosts, from grief, from himself. In the following weeks, the school grew. Women from the edge of town began sending their children, even a few of the white settlers who'd once muttered about that Indian woman. They came first out of curiosity, then out of gratitude. Some days, Nita taught them words. Other days, she taught them songs. On Sundays, she taught them how to plant beans in the dusty ground and told them stories about the land, the way her people once read the stars and listened to the river's voice. She never preached. She simply showed them that learning was its own kind of faith. Abel often found himself standing outside the shed's doorway, hat in hand, watching the light spill across her hair as she moved among the children. The sun turned her dark braids to bronze, her laughter soft and low like wind through tall grass. He didn't say a word, didn't need to. One afternoon, as the kids ran home, Nita stayed behind to clean up. Abel walked up and placed a new bucket of chalk and paper beside her. Thought you might use these, he said. Nita looked up, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she gave a small nod. Thank you. He hesitated. You're doing something good here. Her eyes met his, steady, warm, unguarded. So are you, she said. For the first time in years, Abel felt the air shift inside him. The sun was setting, the sky glowing red against the mountains, and for the briefest second, he could almost swear he smelled lilacs again. Marries flowers. But this wasn't the past coming back. It was something new growing in its place, and it was alive. The wind came first, low, moaning, the kind that carried warnings in its breath, the kind every rancher knew by heart. Abel stepped out onto the porch, looked toward the horizon, and saw the sky turning the color of gunmetal. Clouds rolled over the ridge like smoke from a wildfire. He could feel it before it hit, the electric sting in the air, the uneasy silence before the storm breaks. Even the cattle had gone still, heads low, tails twitching. The desert held its breath. By the time the first crack of thunder hit, the rain was already cutting sideways, hard as gravel. Abel shouted for Nita, his voice torn away by the wind. Get inside! He ran for the corral, lightning tearing across the sky. The ground shook as a bolt struck the north fence, splintering the post and setting dry brush ablaze. In an instant, the herd panicked. They broke the rail and scattered into the dark, hooves pounding like drums. Abel swung open the gate, grabbed his lasso, and ran for the stable. But Nita wasn't there. Her saddle was gone. Fear struck him harder than the rain. He stumbled into the open, blinking through the downpour. Then he saw her, far out in the pasture, a flash of movement between lightning bolts. Nita was on horseback, her figure outlined against the storm. The animal reared, hooves cutting the air, but she held steady, shouting something he couldn't understand. Short, sharp words in Apache that cut through the wind. She cracked her whip, her voice fierce and wild as the thunder itself. Hey-ya! Oh nah! Turn them! The cattle shifted, turning from the slopes, following her lead. Abel watched, frozen for a heartbeat, then grabbed his own horse and rode out. Rain stung his face, mud clung to his boots, but he caught up beside her as she drove the herd back toward the lower field. Lightning flashed again, bright enough to paint her face, eyes blazing, jaw set, soaked to the bone. She looked like something out of an old story, half spirit, half woman, commanding the chaos. They worked side by side in the storm, shouting above the roar. When the last steer stumbled through the gate, Abel slammed it shut and leaned against the rail, chest heaving. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain had softened to a whisper, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Abel turned toward her. Nita slid off her horse, her hair plastered against her face, clothes clinging to her like a second skin. She wiped rain from her brow, breathing hard. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too small for what he'd just seen. Finally, he managed, "You don't need anyone to save you." Her dark eyes met his, glinting in the afterlight. "No," she said softly, "I don't." Abel's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "But you just might have saved me." For a long moment they stood there, drenched and breathless, the storm retreating into the distance. The wind died and the land exhaled, a long, quiet sigh of relief. Abel looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't the woman he'd brought home from that station anymore. She was the land itself, wild, unbroken, alive. And for the first time in years, Abel Harkin realized he wasn't fighting the world alone. The storm passed, but the air still smelled of rain and iron. For days after, the land stayed quiet, like it too was catching its breath. The cattle grazed close to the barn now, and Abel fixed the broken fences with new posts. Nita helped, her hands raw and steady, saying little but doing much. Between them, silence had changed. It no longer felt like distance. It felt like understanding. One afternoon, a rider came down the dirt road from town, a mailbag slung over his shoulder. He waved as he approached the porch. "Letter for you, Harkin. Came from the mission up in Fort Stanton." Abel took the envelope, thick with dust and the smell of travel. "Who's it from?" The rider shrugged. "Don't say. Just the church seal." After he rode off, Abel turned the envelope in his hands. The handwriting was old-fashioned, uneven. He called for Nita. She came from the garden, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes questioning. Abel hesitated before handing it to her. "It's addressed to you." She froze. It had been years since anyone had written her name. Slowly, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged by time and rain. She began to read aloud, soft at first, then quieter still. "To the woman once left behind at Dry Creek Station. If this reaches you, I pray it brings peace. I am Reverend Samuel Croft, the man who served with the missionaries at Fort Stanton. I am dying now, and in the last of my days I cannot leave this world without confessing what I have carried. I judged you. I called you unworthy to walk among God's chosen. I forgot that God made no mistake when He made you. I owe you an apology I cannot deliver in person. May He grant you the mercy I failed to give." The words blurred before her eyes. For a long time, Nita didn't move. The only sound was the creak of the porch boards under Abel's boots. He waited, unsure whether to speak. Finally, she set the letter down on her lap, staring at the handwriting as though it might vanish if she blinked. Tears welled slowly, not sharp or bitter, just quiet, the kind that come when something too heavy finally sets itself down. Abel stepped closer. "You knew him?" She nodded. "He was the one who turned me away. Said my blood made me unfit to teach the Lord's word." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, but there was no anger, only release. Abel knelt beside her chair. His rough hands covered hers, the paper crinkling beneath their palms. "He's wrong about that," he said gently. "You've taught more truth here than any preacher I ever met." Nita let out a shaky breath. The wind stirred, lifting the edge of the letter, fluttering it like a white flag against the afternoon sun. She looked up, eyes shining. "It's strange," she whispered. "All these years I thought I wanted him to pay, but now I just feel free." Abel squeezed her hand. "Then that's enough." For a moment they sat like that, listening to the wind rustle through the mesquite trees, the distant sound of a bell from her little schoolhouse ringing through the open land. Abel glanced toward the hills where the storm clouds had once gathered. "You don't have to go anywhere now, Nita," he said quietly. "You're home." She turned to him and for the first time smiled without hesitation. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." And somewhere out in the fields, the last puddles from the storm shimmered in the sun, small mirrors reflecting a sky finally clear. Winter crept over Dry Creek, slow and quiet, wrapping the hills in pale frost. The air turned thin, the mornings colder. Smoke curled from the chimney again, thin gray ribbons against the endless blue. Inside the cabin, Nita sat near the hearth, needle and thread in hand. The firelight flickered over her face as she worked, her fingers moving with patient rhythm. Across her lap lay pieces of fabric, odd scraps collected from the years that had shaped their lives. One was an old square of Abel's saddle leather, soft and worn, still smelling faintly of horse and dust. Another was a strip from her faded ceremonial shawl, embroidered long ago with Apache symbols for rain and endurance. And then there was a third, a torn piece of white cloth she had once worn in the mission, the edge still marked by faint traces of blue stitching, the color of faith long tested. Nita stitched them together, slow and deliberate, each pass of the needle like breathing, steady, intentional. Abel watched from the corner of the room, pretending to mend a broken harness. He'd been doing that for an hour now, but the truth was, he hadn't fixed a thing. His eyes kept drifting toward her, toward the firelight gleaming in her hair, the quiet grace in her hands. "What are you making?" he finally asked. "A blanket," she said without looking up. "But not just to keep warm." He smiled faintly. "What else for then?" Nita tied off a thread and held the patchwork up to the light. "For remembering," she said. "This piece was yours." She pointed to the brown leather. "And this one was mine." Her hand moved to the white cloth. "This one, that belonged to who I used to be." Abel nodded, the lines on his face deepening. He walked over, crouched beside her, and let his fingers brush over the seams. The textures met: rough leather, soft cotton, smooth hide, all stitched tight by her hand. "Feels strong," he murmured. "It is," she said, "because it's made of what survived." Abel leaned back on his heels. His eyes softened, voice low. "A blanket's a lot like a ranch," he said. "Holds together better when it's patched from different pieces." Nita's lips curved into a small smile. "And people too." For a while, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, casting orange light across the walls. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, whispering across the empty fields. Abel thought about all the things that had broken before. Fences, promises, people. How easy it was for a life to come apart. Yet somehow this woman, this quiet, stubborn, extraordinary woman, had taken all the scraps the world left her and made something whole again. When she spread the quilt across their bed that night, it glowed in the lamplight. Patches of brown and white, soft and strong, stitched by two lives that had once been strangers. Abel sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand over it. "You know," he said slowly, "it's not much to look at from afar. But up close, it tells a story." Nita pulled the corner of the blanket over his shoulders and looked at him with eyes that held the warmth of the desert after rain. "Then it's just like us," she said. Abel chuckled under his breath. "Guess it is." They lay back beneath it, the fire crackling low, the air outside crisp and cold. The quilt covered them, two worlds joined by thread and forgiveness. And for the first time, Abel didn't dream of what he'd lost. He dreamed of what they were still building. By late December, the desert turned white. Snow lay heavy on the sagebrush, and the wind sliced down from the mountains like a blade. The world had gone still, too still. Even the cattle huddled close to the barn, breath rising in clouds against the dawn. Abel knew that silence. It was the kind that came before trouble. The first howl drifted across the hills that night, low, drawn out, mournful. Then another answered. Soon the sound of wolves filled the air, echoing through the canyons, closer than before. Abel set his coffee down, listening. He could picture them out there, gray shadows circling beyond the fence line, hungry eyes glinting in the dark. "They'll come for the herd," he muttered. He reached for his rifle. From the corner of the room, Nita straightened from where she'd been mending clothes. "You can't take them alone." Abel shook his head, pulling on his coat. "I've handled worse." She didn't move. "You've handled being alone. That's not the same thing." Before he could argue, she wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and followed him out into the storm. The cold hit like a slap. The wind howled, carrying snow sideways. They moved through it together, two dark figures against the white. Abel led with the lantern, the beam flickering over the fence posts half buried in drifts. Then came the growl. Low, close. Out of the dark, a wolf lunged. Abel fired once, the crack of the rifle echoing off the hills. The beast dropped, snow exploding around it. But there were more, shapes weaving between the shadows, eyes gleaming, teeth flashing. Nita grabbed a burning brand from the nearby woodpile and swung it wide, the fire spitting sparks into the wind. She shouted something in Apache, sharp, fierce syllables that seemed to split the night itself. The wolves hesitated, startled by her voice, by her courage. Abel moved beside her, firing again and again, until the echoes rolled into the distance and the snow began to settle. The remaining wolves turned and vanished into the trees, swallowed by the storm. When the last sound faded, Abel stood panting, rifle still raised. His breath came out in clouds. The fence was splintered, but the cattle still stood, trembling but safe. He turned to Nita. She was kneeling by the fire she'd made, feeding it dry brush, her face lit gold against the dark. The glow shimmered across her cheeks, her eyes bright and alive. He crouched beside her. For a long while, neither spoke. The storm had passed, leaving only the pop of the flames and the hiss of melting snow. Finally, Abel said quietly, "You're no one's burden, Nita. You're no man's pity." She looked up at him, her lips parting just enough for a smile. "You're my equal," he added. Then after a pause, his voice softened even more. "My partner." Pity? The word hung in the cold air like something sacred. Simple, but true. Nita reached out, placing her gloved hand over his. "Then we'll keep this land together," she said. The sun rose slow behind the ridge, washing the snow in gold. The wolves were gone, but their howls still lingered in the wind, a reminder of what they'd faced and what they'd survived. Abel looked toward the horizon, then back to her. "Partner," he repeated, testing the word like a prayer. It felt right. Spring came slow to Dry Creek, like a promise the earth had almost forgotten how to keep. The frost melted first in the hollows where the cattle drank, then along the fence line where sunlight reached the ground by noon. The world smelled of wet soil and cedar again. Out by the porch, Nita knelt in the dirt, pressing tiny seeds into the thawed earth. Her fingers were rough, the nails rimmed with soil, but she handled each seed with the tenderness of prayer. Abel stood a few yards away, leaning on his shovel, watching. "What are those?" he asked. "Morning glories," she said. "They'll climb the post if you let them." Abel frowned slightly. "Mary used to plant those." Nita paused, meeting his gaze. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. "I know," she said softly. "I found the seeds in that old tin on the shelf." He nodded, quiet. He remembered how his late wife's flowers used to bloom wild along the porch rail, blue as the sky after rain. After she passed, he'd let them die. Couldn't bear to see something that still knew how to grow. Now as Nita worked, the ground seemed to remember her touch. By mid-March, vines began to curl up the posts, green and stubborn, and when the first blossoms came, they burst open like pieces of the morning sky. One evening, Abel sat on the steps while Nita watered the flowers. The sun was setting low behind the hills, painting everything gold. The scent of the blossoms drifted on the warm wind, faint and sweet. He watched her for a long time before speaking. "I used to think that garden died with her," he said quietly. "But maybe—" He stopped, voice thick, then finished. "Maybe it was just waiting for you." Nita didn't answer at first. She set the tin can down, then sat beside him. The light caught the blue in her eyes, deep as twilight. "Maybe it was waiting for both of us," she said, "for the house to have laughter again." A gentle breeze swept through the porch, making the vines sway. The sky stretched endless above them, the kind of sky only the West could make, wide, forgiving, infinite. From the distance came the faint ringing of the school bell, the one Nita had hung beside the old shed where the children learned. Its echo drifted across the prairie, a sound soft as hope. Abel reached over, his hand finding hers. "You've changed this place," he said. "You've changed me." She smiled, small and knowing. "No," she whispered, "you just remembered how to live." They sat like that until the stars began to rise. Two souls that had once been broken, now mended in the quiet rhythm of the desert. If someone had looked from afar, they would have seen a small house standing alone in an ocean of grass. Smoke curling from its chimney, morning glories wrapping the porch posts, and two figures sitting side by side as the sky bled from gold to indigo. The camera of the heart would pull back slowly, the little school bell still ringing in the wind. The fields bathed in the soft blue of dusk. the flowers swaying like waves under the endless western sky. And there, beneath it all, the sound of peace. Two lives no longer running, finally home.